Okay, so my name is Sorgenfrei. I am the Director of Campaigns at Anima. And first of all, I just want to say thank you guys for showing up here today. I hope you'll find this talk both interesting and inspirational. A little disclaimer before we start. This talk is going to be pretty packed, and I am going to introduce a lot of concepts in it. So this is not the time or the place to go really in depth. So consider this more like scratching the surface for those of you who are interested, and consider this like something as an inspiration for further research for yourself. On the other hand, I am here all weekend, and I'd love nothing more than to discuss storytelling with you guys for the rest of the weekend. Before I start, I'd like to share with you my own personal story of how I got involved in animal rights. So when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm in the countryside of northern Jutland. And my dad was a sheep farmer, and until I was 17 years old, until I was 17 years old, I had never really helped him kill animals. He had always asked me to help with the work, and I had done that. But it was only when I was 17 that he asked me to actually participate in killing a sheep. And I remember this very vividly to this very day. I remember how he brought this young sheep into the barn and how we forced her to the ground. And I remember having my hands on her and feeling her heartbeat as I used all my weight to keep her down. And I remember the screams, and I remember the look in her eyes as he slit the throat and she slowly died. And most of all, I remember standing up from this experience and being left with only one feeling, that this is completely wrong. And I guess from my dad's perspective, this was one of those manhood rites of passages where you sit down as a boy and stand up as a man. But it was a different man that stood up. And that day started what has now been 20 years of animal advocacy for me. But let's start at the beginning. So storytelling has been a part of the human experience for as long as time has been, actually. And you could say that storytelling goes as far back as, we can document it as far back as 17,000 years with the first cave paintings. And you can kind of imagine how the hunters who were successful in bringing down a large animal like a mammoth, how that would result in storytelling around the campfire at night. And how about this for a story? God handing down the Ten Commandments to Moses, one of the many stories that turned into the Old Testament. But how about this story, Animal Farm, some cartoon that many of us, at least many people my age, grew up with as kids, and only many years later, of course, we realized that there was a stronger point to this. Well, storytelling is everywhere today, and especially in politics, you'll see politicians using storytelling all the time, especially when they need to show how loving and caring people they are. Well, how about this for a story? I guess nobody been more successful with making a story around a brand than Steve Jobs and the iPhone. The iPhone wasn't just an item that you bought, it was an item that told a story about you as well. Although we don't really know exactly how or when storytelling became a big part of humanity, it's sure that we are wired for stories. And researchers have found some interesting stuff here. For instance, there's such a thing as neural coupling, where you take a story and make it part of your own idea, or it becomes a part of your own ideas and your own experience by listening to it. There's such things as mirroring, where you basically copying the feelings of another person or experiencing the feelings of another person. And you might experience this yourself if you find yourself crying at sad movies. Neuroscientists also realized that dopamine is released when we're exposed to strong emotional stories. Storytelling has never been more important than today, and we've never had better platforms for storytelling than today. You can basically overnight reach millions of people with a viral film. At the same time, equipment and software has become more affordable than ever and better than ever. And the world is accessible to a degree that it's never been before. We can basically travel everywhere in the world to pursue stories. On the other hand, we are exposed to information all the time. Everybody's trying to grab our attention, and this has created a really short attention span for people. And you can say that because storytelling has been so easy with affordable film and software, there's also much more competition now. But for me, that's actually a plus, because that just demands that we raise the bar and set it higher for ourselves. Before I go further with this presentation, I'd like to share a story that when I was in Perpignan a couple of years ago to a photo exhibition with the American photographer Eli Reed, at the end of the presentation, he posed a question to the audience and asked, what is the most important thing for telling a story? And people started guessing, like, it's having the right gear, it's having developed the right skills, and I went like, composition, and somebody said cinematics, and some said processing, but he just kind of like laughed and smiled and said, although all these things are really important for storytelling, the most important thing for telling a story is being there. If you don't find yourself where the action of the story is, you won't be able to tell it. And I'm going to show a couple of short films in this presentation, and the first one I'm going to show is very much about putting yourself in the middle of the action. And the first film I'm going to show is called Machine. It's a story I was commissioned to make for the Unbound project, a project celebrating women in the front line of animal advocacy. And this is a film about my friend and colleague, Lina Christensen, who works with rescuing cage hens. And in this story, we had to use social engineering to even be able to do the job that we went to do. So a lot of the footage is not shot with a proper camera, but it's shot with a hidden camera. But let's dive into this first film.
I notice it as soon as our van enters the farm. All of a sudden, I feel cold. My limbs feel stiff and awkward as I walk up to the workers and force myself to put on a smile. We run a small sanctuary from our backyard, and during the last 5 years, we have rehomed more than 1,200 rescued battery hens. They will spend their lives in big backyards with their new families. A few hens from each rescue get to stay with us. They become ambassadors for their species when media and school classes come to visit our sanctuary. It begins. A deep humming builds up, metallic screeching, then the chirps. Boots on the ramp. As they reach the hatch in midair, the desperate cackling, and finally the slams as they disappear into the machine. And so, the rhythm begins. I force my stiff limbs to move closer as another worker approaches, each hand clinging on to 5 pairs of legs. As he walks up, I reach out to receive them, but he's already planned his swing, and the soft feathers slip through my fingertips to forever disappear. I, too, have to become part of the rhythm to be able to do my work. As a child, I always had a strong connection with birds. Most people never get to know them because birds won't show who they are if you don't take your time to get to know them. They will hide from you until they really trust you, and it takes a real effort to build a connection. I think I saw a big part of myself in that as well. As I work, I don't feel anything at all. I reach out to a worker and receive 5 panicking birds. The 5 in his other hand get stuffed into the machine. 5 set free, 5 for the machine. And so we continue to work, side by side, the machine and me. Today, 30,000 animals ended their life in the machine. Each a miracle of life, each a feeling and thinking individual. After a life in a cage, they're mere shadows of themselves, broken beings. But slowly they start to come alive again, and so do I. world opens up for them. Everything is brand new. Learning to drink. Scraping for food. And best of all, the first steps on grass and the soft breeze through their feathers. At last, life begins.
Thank you. For this short film, I tried to work with creating a relationship between the viewer and Lena. As we're going to discuss later in this presentation, we'll see that it can be very hard for people to form a connection to animals, especially birds and hens, since they are very, very different from us. So in this film, the aim was to make people see hens from Lena's perspective, make them see hens through Lena's eyes, and make them feel what Lena feels. And there's done some really interesting research about this, and I'd like to read this paragraph aloud for you because I think it's both precise and very interesting. So, we discovered that in order to motivate a desire to help others, a story must first sustain attention, a scarce resource in the brain, by developing tension during the narrative. If the story is able to create that tension, then it is likely that the attentive viewers will come to share the emotions of the character in it, and after it ends, likely to continue mimicking the feelings and behaviors of those characters. So this is something you'll find me working a lot with in the films that I do, trying to connect people to the character, using Lena in this movie as a medium for making people relate to the animals. But let's talk a bit more about these key concepts, and let's start with attention. This is something you probably experienced yourself. You're walking in the grass, and all of a sudden you realize that your body jumps back. You thought you saw a snake in the grass. On further inspection, it turns out it was just a water hose or maybe a branch, but your body still reacted to it instinctively. And maybe we can say that we are programmed as well to react to something as eyes in the darkness, like yellow eyes in the darkness, because there could be a predator in the hunt back in the ancient days. Maybe this is why we still to this day find images such as these haunting. But it turns out that the brain is constantly scouting or analyzing our surroundings to look for something that's dangerous or other things that are important for our survival. And this is interesting because you could say that there's a different program. Well, you can say that it's a very hard program to run because it's hard to analyze all this raw data that goes in. So what we do is that we run a different program that kind of runs prior to our consciousness. And what this program does is that it's analyzing for the more simple lines and the more simple shapes and contrast. And this is something that, well, you can see how it works with this snake, because on further inspection it turned out that it was just a water hose. But had you not reacted to it as if it was a snake, you might have stepped on it, and had you stepped on it and it had been a snake, it might have killed you. And this is something that photographers such as William Mortensen has been elaborating and developed a lot. And in the 30s, he already released the book, The Command to Look, in which he developed and elaborated on what is now considered basic rules of photography and filmmaking. So on the left here, you'll see a list of things that are very important for creating that command to look or grabbing people's attention. It can be such things as composition, contrast, similarity, shapes, framing, color contrast, leading lines, balance, depth, and texture. And let's have a look at some of the talented photographers in our movement and some of their work and see how they utilize these techniques to create that command to look and grasp the attention of people. This is a photo by Joanne MacArthur from 2010, and I like these images for many reasons. I guess many of you, what you see as the first thing is the calf in the wheelbarrow, and maybe you even focus straight on the eye straight away. And maybe you do this because there's a strong color contrast. Maybe you do it because you decided to put this in the foreground of the image. But it could also be because she's utilizing a technique of placing the subject of interest at a special place in the image. If you imagine two lines, two going down vertically and two going over horizontally, you can see that you've formed kind of a grid. And right at the center of one of these grids, you have the eye of the calf. At the other corner of the grid, you have this guy in the background. And this is a place where the eye naturally wants to rest or investigate in an image. And by placing the subjects of interest here, you create a form of movement and starts to tell a story. Here's another photo by a Finnish photographer, Kristo Mudima. And in this photo, he's utilizing the natural leading lines in a broiler shed. You can see how your eyes straight away starts following these lines down to the background, and it almost feels like the photo continues into eternity. And this photo is strangely comfortable, it's strangely pleasing, almost aesthetic to me. And I find this is an image that I like to look at, and because it grabs my attention and I like to look at it, it starts raising questions for me. Here's a photo by a German photographer, Timo Stamberger, from his collection Making the Connection. And here, Timo is creating leading lines, both to illustrate the scale of this broiler production, and at the same time, he's creating again this almost aesthetic or pleasing feel to this image, which makes you want to look and also makes you want to question what's going on here. And you can kind of see like how these two images would be very powerful next to each other. Here's another photo by Joanne MacArthur from her recent project Captive, which I really like for many reasons. First of all, she's utilizing many of these techniques that activates the brain. That's the leading lines in the photo. She's creating shapes, she's using color contrast, she's using different textures. But most of all, the story just connects with us straight away. Like, we straight away can imagine what it's like to be this monkey inside this cage, reaching out to the lush greens. And what these three photographers do is that they try to take a very simple, they try to simplify the photo using the techniques, but take as simple a photo as possible. And this is a way of grabbing the attention of people, but grabbing attention is not enough. You'll often see photos fail when they only try to grab the attention. You'll have many photos that's just screaming, look, look, look. And then when people look, like, the photo really has nothing to say. And I think all these four photos that we just looked at, they're all raising a question. So first of all, we need to grab attention, but then you need to raise a question. And once you got the attention of the brain, it loves nothing more than trying to answer that question. As you can see, our brain is quite comfortable in filling in the gaps of itself. And it turns out the more the brain has to work to fill in the blanks, the more we remember the stories. And that's something that you'll find me working with a lot. I think we should be careful with putting the conclusion too much out to people. It's good to let people kind of like imagine and try to form their own conclusions from our films. Let's do a little test here, a little experiment. If you think that the photo on your left side is the stronger of these two, please raise your hand. If you think the photo on the right for you is the stronger, please raise your hand. Okay, I agree with the majority here. Although the photo on the left is powerful, I find that the photo on the right has the much stronger story. This is clearly a story about an animal who's next in line to what's happening in the background. And this ties into another thing to take into consideration when making film. The blood and the gore, well, you need to ask yourself, can it be seen? Well, on a practical level, Facebook will basically block your video if it's full of blood and gore. But there's also such thing as defense mechanisms and preconceptions to take into consideration. Or how do you tell the story of the invisible suffering of an animal that doesn't have any clear wounds or injuries, but who spent its entire life in a cage? How do you communicate that? And how is it possible for people to relate to an individual, for instance, if they are seeing 40,000 animals at the same time? So maybe the main problem here is that people have lost the connection to farm animals. While we still have a strong connection with dogs and cats, very, very few people are actually exposed to farm animals. But something I often found myself struggling with in the beginning of making films is that I never asked myself the question, what's the story? Like, what I like to do was just to see, like, okay, here's some exciting character that I can chase around, or I'm going to go and shoot some really cinematic footage, or hey, here's some really cool action footage, or whoa, this is the worst horror footage ever. And later I find myself at the computer editing, trying to make meaning of all of this, and I realize there's absolutely no story here. There's just all these kind of different elements. And then I start to try to force a story down on it. I'm really trying to see okay, how can I make this into a story? But 9 out of 10 times I realize that I can't force the story down on the footage. So for this reason, it's important to study a bit of structure for filmmaking if this is something you'll be interested in doing, or storytelling in general. And there's many different tools you can use for this, and this is just a little range of that. But one of the classic storylines that you'll often see used in Hollywood movies is the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is, we're going to look a bit more into it, but it's basically the story of the untested hero who sets out to overcome some big challenge, and through a big adventure conquers everything and comes home a changed person. And this could be a movie like Star Wars, but you'll basically see this storyline go over and over in Hollywood movies. You can also use a chronological progression where you tell a story from the beginning to end. Many documentaries, maybe especially war documentaries, follow this structure. Or it can be a search motive, as in Cowspiracy, where Kip sets out to investigate why is it that environmental organizations are not focusing on the damages of meat eating. At the essence of it, the most simple way to approach writing a story is to look at it from a 3-act structure, where you basically have a setup, a confrontation, and a resolution. And this can be as simple as this for a very short film, or for a feature length. It can get very complicated, where you're building suspense throughout the entire film. A way I like to look at storytelling is the way Dan Harmon has developed this structure for stories. And you might know Dan Harmon from series such as Community and Rick and Morty. And they often follow this structure. And he kind of boiled it down to 8 phases. You, need, go, search, find, take, return, change. So this is again the story of your protagonist, or your hero, who's living her everyday life, and somehow some need appears, something out of the ordinary appears that makes it necessary for the hero to go out into the world in search of something. And sooner or later you'll have this character find what she's looking for, only to realize that it came with a take. And take here should be understood as a price you have to pay for finding what you were looking for, a heavy price or a burden. And this is where you'll find your hero at her lowest. And now it's time for her to drag herself up by the neck and get out of the mud, go face the final challenges in the return, and then come back as a changed person. And Dan Harmon quite humorously breaks the matrix down to a 2-line analysis following the story structure. An everyday guy gets a weird call, and upon following it realizes that reality was an illusion. He learns the ropes, talks to the oracle, loses his mentor, goes back and saves the fucking day. And you can basically break a lot of successful movies down to this basic structure. Another important thing when doing film and working with characters is being true to their emotions when you convey them. And this is something I found myself struggling with a lot. And basically what often happened in the beginning was that I would follow some exciting character around, and I would kind of like have an idea about, okay, how should this Polish person react to a certain situation? Okay, should react with tears and crying. It should be very emotional right now. But no, it's just going to be a straight face all the way through. And then I find myself back in the editing room and like trying to impose all these emotions down on the story when it's not there. And that just results in catastrophe. Like, you can never do it. And I had to learn that the hard way. So you have to be true to your character, and you need to be subtle about it as well. And if you can't convey the emotions of a person, well, maybe you're just not looking hard enough, or maybe you're not good enough at doing your job. So what I realized is that I work with a lot of characters, not in the two project featuring characters that I'm showing here, but in general I work with a lot of characters that are quite quiet, who doesn't like to show emotions. And I realized that emotion doesn't need to be someone crying or screaming. It can be as subtle as a close-up of someone who's then looking away from the camera, or swallowing before speaking, or just holding a gaze a bit too long, or changing the gaze. And those things can actually turn out to be extremely efficient if you establish the character as a quiet introvert person. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't that you should be afraid of ghostwriter or write sentences for the person that you're doing a film about, or to write the narration. You just need to know your character good enough to be true to their own nature. And the same thing goes for nature, and the same thing goes for music, and I definitely overdo it all the time as well, and I've probably overdone it in the first two films here already. You need to find the right score, and you can't overdo it. It needs to be subtle, like enough with the violins and piano, although it seems to work so great, but it's so easy to do it over the top. Before getting to the last film that I'm going to show here today, I'd like to address what I call the dinosaur in the room. Why is it that chickens are so far down the pecking order of our moral concern? And it might come as no surprise for you that the hierarchy of interest for humans is based on how close are you to a human. So humans are more interested in humans than in animals, but more interested in animals in nature, more interested in nature than in inanimate objects, generally speaking. And within animals, of course, there's a clear hierarchy as well, where we care more about dogs than we care about pigs, but we care more about pigs than we care about chickens. And a simple way to explain this is that we care about what's most similar to us. And since we're mammals, well, dogs and pigs are kind of close to us in the way they behave and they act, whereas chickens and birds in general, well, they're basically just modern-day dinosaurs, right? So for the last film I'm going to show here, it's a film about broiler chickens, one of the biggest challenges that the movement is facing. And in this, again, I try to work with a character where the aim is to build a relationship between the viewer and the character. Again, to make the viewer share the emotions of the character with the goal of her continuing to mimic the feelings and behaviors of that character. So this is my most recent film, and maybe many of you have already seen it. It was translated into 15 languages. And for this, I also tried to work with a multi-layered story. So I wanted to create something that could have an impact even after you finished watching the movie. The more you pay attention to this film, the more messages, or the more you can reflect on it. And while you watch this movie, I'd like you to ask yourself 3 questions. And this is something that's a very good exercise for yourself to do when you're writing a story as well. What is the story? What is it about? And what is it really about? And yes, there will be a quiz at the end. Oops. All right.
These woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Tonight, the investigation team and I have set out to document one of the secrets of factory farming. The images I'll shoot tonight will haunt me for months to come, but they hold the key to helping millions of animals. Like a blanket, the darkness enfolds me. I breathe in the crisp air and look up at the moon. These surroundings calm me. They sharpen my senses, as they've done so many nights before. Every investigator knows that nightmares are not born of darkness. They emerge under industrial fluorescent lights. This is how modern-day chickens are raised. The barn feels more like a field of chickens. And in here, they're treated much like crops. These animals have been bred to grow so fast that their hearts and legs can hardly keep up with the pressure from their bulking bodies. We haven't spent more than a minute here before we can see the dead scattered amongst the living. To some, death comes quickly. Others wither slowly away. She starts to nod off a little bit when we're quiet. And she's got a badly paralyzed or injured leg. So she pushes herself around, flaps around, but she can't really walk anymore. This is going to be her fate. She'll never receive individual care by a veterinarian. I'm so sorry. Her body isn't even close to being worth the price of a vet bill. I'm so sorry. Like hundreds of others in this barn, she will either die on her own or be killed by the farmer on his daily round to pick up the dead and dying. I wonder how these chickens will react once they realize I mean no harm. I stop shooting, sit down, and put my camera on the ground. At first, they're still cautious, but soon the bolder birds start to get closer. They're curious. Soon I find myself surrounded by a sea of chickens. I'm covered in chickens right now. They're clambering to get up here. There's tens of thousands of birds in here, but, you know, if these guys were at Farm Sanctuary or at any sanctuary, they would have a name. And it's just so different here. Here they're not individuals. I always had a love and a concern for animals, but I was in my 20s before my relation to chickens changed. My mom had pet chickens at home, and I fell in love with their charming ways and their quirks. But at the same time, I was eating chicken for dinner. I was quick to realize that these animals were no different from the dogs and other animals I so adored. I made a promise to animals then, one that I keep to this day, that I wouldn't harm them, that I'd use my camera to tell their stories, and that I'd never turn away. This chicken has never been pet before, and she loves it, and chickens just love this. She's settling down onto my hands. She's starting to clean herself now, because she likes what I'm doing so much. Look at this. She's settling into my hand because it's warm. She's happy. Yes. Yes, I like you too. I know that you're sweet. I mean, she's sitting in my hand. I'm feeling her little heartbeat. As dawn approaches, our time here is running out. It's time to leave. The stinging pain in my chest never lets me down. I get to leave. They don't. Keeping people in the dark enables this industry to exist without scrutiny. Photography is my contribution, my way of shining a light in that darkness, my way of creating change, my promise. You too can make a promise to not cause harm, to look, to really see, and to never turn away.
guys. If you are more interested in the work that Joanne is doing, I can recommend her talk tomorrow. And if you're interested in the work that Lina Lind Christensen is doing, featured in the film Machine, you should check out her talk tomorrow morning. And okay, so quiz time. Does anybody have a good idea here? If you should look at this like kind of like as the most simple way to describe it, what is the story? Thank you. But if you should describe the action or what happens in this film, then like what is the story? David?
Night in the life of an investigator.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Did you read that? No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
It's an individual connection to an individual animal.
Mm-hmm. And what is it about? Well, maybe that's what. Mm-hmm. Any ideas? What is it about?
It's about a connection with animals.
Mm-hmm. And what is it really about?
That's forest factory farming.
Well, I think you had all the right answers. I think I put mine in a bit of different order. So for me, this story is, as David said, a woman investigates a broiler farm. As what's the story and what is it about? Promise given, promise kept, and the price for that promise. And what is it really about? Like, what's the take that is not explained in this film that you kind of like need to make out on your own? Chickens are no different from dogs or cats. And I think even though all people might not get this point, well, it definitely requires you to pay attention and reflect on it. But if you come at this conclusion on your own by doing this reflective work, this message will stay with you so much stronger. Okay, so the final thing I'm going to talk about here is to learn to take criticism. Like whatever you do, if you're a photographer, if you're a writer, if you are a filmmaker, you need to learn to take criticism and never be afraid to fail. And my good friend and colleague who I started the organization with has always had a very nice way of giving feedback to me. So if I might have spent an entire night editing some idea and been totally obsessed with this and just come as the first thing in the morning and show it to him, I remember like many times him standing behind the chair and me like sitting looking really smirked, me like I did something good, and he's like, Jan, this is shit. And I think like I really appreciate this straightforward answer, and I think you should really appreciate having people like that in your life who will tell you their gut feeling, because if people won't tell you this, you'll start producing something that's not as good as it could be. Of course, there always follows some more some better critique afterwards as well, but I think you should just kind of like really appreciate when people say bad things about your work. So to end this presentation and to sum up what I said in the beginning, as you see, this is barely scratching the surface, and I'd love nothing more than to continue to discuss these issues with you. And if you have any ideas, if you're like working already on a project, a film, a photo project, or writing something, I'd love to discuss it with you. So please feel free to come chat me up.